Hi, everybody. I am Cheney Clemens. I am Assistant Director of Family Education Services here at Family Tree. And I have with me the wonderful
Wanda Ashley. I'm a parent education specialist at the Wonderful Family Tree.
Family Tree. So we're just here today. We wanted to just have a conversation and a talk. We wanted it to be a little bit more informal. Didn't want it to feel like so stuffy, just to have a conversation about how you can talk to your children about violence. So we, are aware of what social media has going on, things that we see on TV, maybe even things you're hearing on the radio, things that they're picking up on YouTube or anywhere on the internet. So we just wanted to have some conversations about ways you can have these talks with your children, some different ideas. And like we said, we wanted to be kind of informal. So it's just like us having a conversation together. So Wanda, you want to start? You want me to start? What you think?
Maybe I can just start. Are we going to start talking about the topic or?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Why this is kind of an important topic, probably most of you would say we've heard a lot of disturbing events that have involved children, some of the recent shootings, school shootings, and probably in your particular community, maybe you hear even more about children, that frightening things that are happening to children. And two things that you want to keep in mind with children in the news. Number one, remember, and we talk about this in our parenting sessions, children's minds are different than ours. So for a child, if they happen to catch the news, whether it's on the radio or television, and they repeatedly keep hearing these tragic stories, even if it's the same story, sometimes in their mind, they're constantly hearing all of these different tragedies. They don't think that it's the same story, but they keep thinking it's more and more tragedies. That's one thing. And number two, because I took some notes, disturbing events distorts your child's view of the world. So as a parent, you want to be aware of how these events are affecting your children. So you want to be able to look for signs that your children are being really affected by these things. Maybe it's their sleep or their eating.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Like, what is something that you might know? Do you think it would be more in like conversation? Do you think the kids would share it? Like, oh, this is bothering me?
Not necessarily. And
No.
and that depends probably on a couple of things. It may depend on the age of your child. It may depend on the relationship you have with your child. So that's why it's important that parents become aware of what might be some potential signs that maybe their children are feeling overwhelmed with all of the news of the violence that's going on today.
And you know what I think I've seen some of these things is when you ask kids to like write a poem or draw a picture, and they're drawing pictures about things that are like bothering them, right? So like you said, they might not say it like, oh, well, some of them might, it depends, everybody's child is different. But when it comes to like, if you just let them sit on their own, the things they're doing, or even if they're building Legos and they're building like guns with Legos, right? They're drawing these things, violent pictures, and you ask them to write a poem or write a story and it's very violent. And, sometimes it like takes you back because you're not even expecting it. Like, oh my goodness, where did this even come from? And I think that sometimes parents just don't even pay attention to, like you said, the small things we don't even pay attention on TV because we've heard it more than one time. And like you said, we can differentiate between this is the same story that we keep hearing. Instagram, TikTok, all the things that now the kids are exposed to all the time, especially if it's something big in the media that happened, like something major, it's going to be on all the outlets, no matter what. So it's just in their faces constantly.
Exactly. So keeping that in mind, there's a few pointers that parents might want to consider. Based on the age and maturity and emotional makeup of your children, you may want to consider limiting the intake or exposure of news. And you might have to be a little crafty about that because you have to figure out how is your child being exposed to the news? Is it through their phone? Is it through television? and however, wherever those leaks are, you might want to consider limiting how much of their intake in on the news.
So how do you do that without the child feeling like their own punishment, right?
Oh, that's a good question.
So if you're taking it away, it's like, well, I didn't even do anything. Or if it's like, cut that off or whatever from a child, I don't want them to necessarily, or do you just have the conversation? Do you just at that point, like have that conversation? Like, listen, there's a lot happening right now, and maybe we're just going to pull back a little bit instead of them feeling like it's punitive on their end.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think for me, because it's my personality, I probably would have a conversation with the child. And maybe that's possibly dependent also on their age. Because if they're younger, it's probably easier just to say, hey, let's look at this movie, or let's do this, or let's do that. But for me, if they're older and you want to show more respect for them, I would have a conversation. And it doesn't have to be something deep or heavy. It's just something, like, hey, it's a lot of negativity right now. Maybe we should do this, or maybe you shouldn't, listen to the news so much.
When it comes to things that are happening maybe locally or on a community level that children might be exposed to in person,
good point.
How do you have those type of conversations? Because it's not necessarily now from a media outlet. It's like maybe you come home and there's yellow tape. And a lot of our kids, it is not uncommon for children under the age of 18 to have seen violence up close in person in their neighborhood. So what I've experienced a lot of time is that parents will not have these conversations and just send the kids to school, not even thinking that it's a big deal. Some of them don't even because I think the other thing that a note for parents is that kids really internalize all the things. They see all the things. And sometimes you're like, if you don't talk about it, maybe they won't mention it, or maybe they didn't see it, or maybe they don't think it's a big deal, but they see these things and they internalize it and they hold it in. And then maybe sometimes when they get in spaces, you'll hear kids having conversations about, oh, this happened in my neighborhood, or this happened in my neighborhood, or I saw this, or I've seen this. And you're like, oh my goodness, I can't even believe that they've seen these things. And no one has said anything because parents kind of keep it hush instead of having these conversations.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And that actually segues into my second point of what parents might consider doing. I'm a strong believer in using every opportunity, good or bad, to educate. And even if it's something that's bad that's happening, I think that we should have more confidence in children's natural coping abilities. And it makes it harder on them when we don't talk about it. So I agree, even if, especially if it's something that's happened locally in their neighborhood, you should take the time to try to draw them out to see how they feel about it. And it's an excellent point, because I was actually thinking about it. There was a recent incident in Baltimore where, and I didn't read the whole story, I believe it was two siblings and one accidentally shot and killed the other one. So if that's the case, and that's something that happened in your child's neighborhood, that's a good opportunity for you to teach your children about gun safety, about what your view is of guns. Maybe you're a parent, you can emphasize, well, that's why I don't believe in having guns in the home. Or if you do, you can talk about gun safety, and then you can extend to them. So now let's talk about what you would do if you're at a friend's house and you all find a gun. Let's do a scenario about what can happen, because now you see the bad effects, because we lost so-and-so in the block, and we don't want that to happen. And I find that when you do that with children, because I used to do that with my son with different things, that children, when you play it out for them like that, and they actually get in that situation, they're very obedient and they remember, and they'll be quick to say, no, put that away. no, I'm going to tell an adult, because
Mhm.
they get it when you talk to them about it in that way.
I do. I really like that role play, that aspect of role playing. Yeah. Well, what
Mhm.
would you do in a situation? Almost like, and they'll look at it maybe like a game, right?
Yes.
It's not a game. On the other side of it, it's real life. And you know what that kind of made me think of, which I really hate to even think it would ever be a thing, but when it comes to being in schools,
Mhm.
and sometimes not even in schools, and having all of these mass shootings in places, um, there's plans. If there's shelter in place and things like that, even as a parent, and we're talking to your kids about violence, and then, like you said, piggybacking on doing the role playing, if
Mhm.
you're in certain places, well, what about if you're out at the mall? Because things are happening, right? And so violence is not just necessarily, it's things that can happen no matter what or where. So
It's
like
true.
at the mall, whether we're in a movie theater, if we're at a restaurant, like, maybe as a family, this is a plan that we have together. Make sure that, you're keeping your eye on me, make sure we're holding hands, make sure your cell phone is charged, right? To my teenagers. And even with that, with parents, because of that, are you making sure you have like a tracker on your kid's phone, like all of these things
It's
when it
true.
comes to, I don't know if you consider the mass shooting things as part of like violence, but it's still good to like have a plan. And I
Mhm.
don't know if enough parents are even thinking of it in those terms of trying to have plans in different places.
Yes. And it's interesting you brought that up. I remember when my son, I guess he was a toddler, maybe. And my husband at the time had the idea of, okay, we're going to do an experiment on what he would do if he was abducted. And he would kind of tell him things like, listen, when we're walking in the mall, because you mentioned that, don't walk too far in front of mom and dad, because it's very easy for somebody to come up and abduct you. And he actually did it. He came up from behind him and picked him up, like he was abducting him. And I didn't particularly like that, but he did come back and have the conversation with him.
Mhm.
That's why we tell you not to walk ahead, because
Yeah.
just as quickly as I came up behind you, picked
Mhm.
you up, if I would have started running, it would have been hard for even your parents to be able to get you, and somebody can go out the door with you.
Yeah.
So I think there's value in doing things kind of like what you said, because, and you have to look at it from a child's perspective. First of all, it takes their mind off of the event that happened, which is kind of a good thing. And it
Mhm.
gives them the perspective of, oh, well, there's something that mom and dad is doing to try to make me safe. Because
Yeah.
these events leave children feeling vulnerable and feeling unsafe. So the more things that we can do to involve them and teach them and let them know, hey, unfortunately, this is the world we live in. So
Mhm.
these are some things that we're going to do to help you to be safe.
Yeah, and the same thing, I mean, because back to school time is literally right around the corner. But those are things that you're doing, those are things that they're doing in school, right? They're
Mhm.
doing the shelter in place, which is very scary. It
Yeah.
is. It really is on the other side of it. Working in a school and not having to be in a classroom and being one of the folks that had to walk around in the silent building while we're practicing even scared me because it was
Yeah.
so quiet in that way. But so they're doing these things in school. So they're already used to kind of doing it. They're used to doing a fire drill. They're used to, I don't know, they still do. Remember let me say back in the day, we had to jump off the bus in case you had to have a bus evacuation. You never did that? Okay.
I never took the school bus
But
back then.
at school, they would bring the school bus to the school and you would have to like jump off the bus, like almost like a drill. I don't know
I
if they
don't
still do
remember
that.
that.
It was a
I,
thing.
I've heard of
Y'all,
that, but I
yes,
don't remember
tell the
doing it.
people, comment if y'all remember that. Don't have me out here thinking that I'm the only one who had that experience. I know somebody else that jumped off the back of the school bus before. But I'm just saying, like all these drills that they do, the same thing, you can apply those things at home, whether it's in your house and you have a drill. And I know, again, we're talking about violence and it kind of shifted into safety, but just the same thing, like at home, if there's a fire, like these type of things that they're doing in school and places they're already used to, you can
Right.
bring those things home and kind of do those same things too.
Right.
One thing that you said kind of brought my mind back to thinking about, I don't know how my mind got there, but the violence on TV and
Mhm.
what different people consider violent television. My goddaughter is 12 and she was here with me for a week and she spent like most of the time watching Vampire Diaries. Some people would think that's extremely violent, right? And not for like kids to watch, and other people like it's a teenage show, so it's okay. So like how do you really determine like what's too much or what's not too much when it comes to like those type of things and like what your kid is watching and or listening to?
That's an excellent
That's too much
question.
to unpack at one time.
Well, it kind of goes into, I think, another subject or area that you might want to discuss. What would be considered too much violence? Because that's a whole nother area that people talk about, that we, in, I guess, this society world, I guess, there's an argument that we allow our children to consume violent programming. And their argument is that it deadens them as far as what is violence and what is not.
That's what I'm asking. Is there, is
that's
it
kind
just,
of a whole nother subject.
Is it a, person to person type of thing? I know that, they have TV 13 rated R and those type of things. And I'm like, who is watching Vampire Diaries at 9:00 in the morning eating cereal? But like, okay, you're quiet. You're entertained. Go ahead. If that's what you want to do in your summer break. And then somebody else might be like, well, why would you let her, do that? And I'm like, so is it person to person or, and I think it goes, back to violence just in general. Maybe it's about your comfortability as a parent, right? Because I can't tell you.
Yeah. But I mean, I think it would be an interesting topic. Don't know how you would necessarily do it, but I think it's a great topic.
I don't know either. Maybe we have to stay tuned for a part 2. Part 2 coming soon.
But there's one other point that I wanted to also emphasize in what I had said, the other points. This is a time too to help your children to maintain a proper or balanced perspective of the news. Because yes, the news is very fearful. Yes, there's a lot of violence, but you want to be able to put it in perspective. And I got a story that I thought was interesting with that point. There was an 11-year-old boy in 2005 that was lost in the mountains in Utah. And he was so afraid of kidnappers because of, I guess, the stories that he had been hearing at the time, that when the rescuers had been approaching him for days, he would hide from them because in his mind, they were kidnappers. So when they finally found him, he was weak and dehydrated. But the argument being in the article was that the odds of him at that time, now maybe it's different now, of being kidnapped by a stranger was something like 1 in 350,000. But his fears led him to the point that even when the rescuers were closing in on him to rescue him, he kept hiding rather than accept the help. So sometimes we've got to help our children to have a balanced view of these incidents. And it's really hard to say this, but we've had Columbine, we've had Uvalde, and we've had some other ones. However, if all of those incidents, and I'm not saying they are, if all of those incidents were 10 incidents, there's hundreds or thousands of schools. So, I don't know the statistics, but.
So it makes kids like, and again, that's back to having the conversation with them about, yes, I understand these things are happening. But how do we not necessarily move forward, but how do we have a plan for you to feel safe in this way? So back to what you said before, have a plan that you're talking about as a family.
Yes.
If they have a plan that you've talked about personally, right? Not necessarily something at school, But if you talk to your child about saying, look, if this happens, maybe this is what you can do, or maybe this, make sure you call me, or maybe you can try this or that, so that they feel like, oh, I've talked to my mom about this already also. So it's not just something that my teacher is saying, my mom said this. So they'll feel a little bit more comfortable. But you know, for people to, and there are some kids and parents who feel very afraid to send their kids, you know, to school, and
I certainly understand it.
Right. Because things are happening. But like I said earlier, this is everywhere now. It's at the mall, it's at Walmart, it's at movie theaters. And so, you know, how do we still live our lives while violence is still a part, you know, of what's happening in America, but still making sure that we're safe and that our kids feel safe. And so I think those were some of the great points that we were able to at least try to like touch on. I know me and you can probably sit for hours and like talk about all the things, but just to like, you know, give folks some type of perspective of things they can do. Okay, so go back through your points 1, 2, 3 one more time before we
close. Let's go through my points because I have notes here. So
yes,
protect them. Okay. And part of that is being open and honest with them. You might want to minimize how much exposure that they're having with the news. If they're younger, then you can just kind of change the channel, if you will, or control how much they're being exposed to. And the suggestion is if they're older, then have a talk with them. Don't just, well, I'm gonna take your phone or whatever. I'll conversate with them. Show them that you respect the fact that they do have a mind, especially if they're teenagers. Number 2, educate them. Especially if it's, you mentioned if it was a local incident, don't keep them in the dark, because sometimes parents think if we don't talk about it, then they'll just forget it. That's not so. It's actually better if you try to draw them out and see how they feel about the incident, and then you can provide comfort based on your knowledge of how they're feeling. And then reassure them, you know, let them know, like you mentioned, that you have some emergency plans as a family of what if this happens? What if there's an incident at your school? What if this happens at the mall? Yeah. And then if they know that, well, mom and dad talked to me about this, then they'll feel better. And then 4th, maintain perspective. Yeah, you know, we don't want to be cold and say, well, it only happened at this school in Texas and it's not necessarily going to happen at every school. But remember, their minds are different than ours. When they keep hearing this news shooting at them every day, then in their minds, when they walk out the door, people are going to be shooting at them. And that might not necessarily be true.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. So thank you guys for tuning in at our little tiny TED Talk. Is this a TED Talk? Do we have to like stand in the thing for it to be a TED Talk? It could be an hour talk. Thank you guys for sitting in with us today. Hope these tips helped you guys, and have a good school year, right? And join us next time. Thank you.
Thank you.